tail end of it, you were exploring the characteristics and the ideal traits that you'd be looking for in those that could pass and be drawn into selection to come out the other end as the candidates that we want to be the elite of the elite within the armed forces. And I know you won't be able to distill it down into bullet points, but the conversations we've had in the past, the overarching theme has been that there isn't an ideal candidate, but there are ideal lessons that need to be learned to get a person in the right place to be in the mindset that they need to be to approach selection. And if that makes sense to you, I'm just going to open up the floor for you to develop that a little bit, because it's kind of reaching into conversations we've had in the past as a terribly worded question, but a bit of an angle for you to broaden on.
Yeah. So what is it that we're looking for? Is that the question?
In theory, yeah, yeah,
Yeah. So it's a fantastic question, and it's incredibly complicated. In a nutshell, if I could distill it down, and I will, I would say people that are prepared to navigate uncertainty. So me joining the Marines, and again, this is my story, and it's my origin story, if you like, and um, it's useful for people to understand themselves. But as a volunteer for Marines, I had no idea what I was letting myself in for. I was prepared to navigate whatever challenges were thrown my way. When I went on to selection, I had not spoken to anybody that had passed. I'd only ever spoken to people that had failed. So I had some idea, but that was massively skewed by their, rightly so, sort of tail between their legs, stories of absolute impossibility of passing the course. So it was pretty warped view of what the selection process was like. And I knew, again, maybe not consciously, but I knew subconsciously I just had to go and find out myself. I was never going to get the answers that I needed and whether I was what they were looking for. So I myself was prepared to go into the unknown. And again, for context, I think it's important. When I did that, that was beginning of 2003, back end of 2002, and a long time ago now. And there wasn't an awareness of anything to do with what they did. It was so much more this level of secrecy. Now, I guess some people would be saying, well, in part because of people like me talking a little bit more about it. I mean, I only ever share the kind of personal, the kind of human aspect to it, never really the detail of the organizations. But there is a lot more known about the organizations. The internet has just, it's out there. There is data out there. There's information you can, at the touch of a button or the type of a keypad, you can find out anything you want nowadays within some level of detail. And so, I didn't grow up having that access. We had the children's Britannica, Book of Britannica, that was our resource for getting information. I sound like a real old knob, but there was a lot of information that we didn't have access to, and we had no way. Nowadays it's different. And so people, and again, I'm the same. If I want to know something, I just Google it. But navigating that uncertainty, going towards something where you don't know what the answers are, you've got no idea. I think that's really important. So that's absolutely a key thing that we're looking for with individuals, that a willingness to go into something that's unknown, but they trust in themselves that they'll not give up and they'll not stop until somebody else says that's enough, or it's time to switch focus and do something else now. And that's quite important. Now, I feel really lucky. With me learning all this and kind of doing an awful lot of thinking. I'm fascinated by this, Fergus. I've got an interest in psychology. I've always been fascinated by it, and so I've always looked through my career through the lens of a bit of psychology, and so I've always been thinking about these things in a little bit more detail. And I was really lucky towards the end of my career, probably about 4 years before the end, to be invited out to Wharton Business School to go and visit something called the Mission Critical Team Institute. What on earth is that? Well, Wharton Business School is the world's most successful business school on the basis of what their graduates earn when they leave. Again, that's a separate story to one of measure success, but that's how they measure it. It's viewed as number one in the world. And their Mission Critical Team Institute is a program that's led by a great guy called Professor Preston Klein, and doctor now, actually, Professor Klein, Preston Klein. And he he runs this mission critical team institute, where mission critical team is defined as groups of teams of people that within 300 seconds or less have problems thrown at them that if they don't solve them, there's catastrophic issues on the back of that. So like loss of life or huge problems. So organizations like NASA, organizations like special forces, organizations like the FBI, organizations like CIA, all these organizations, really, SEAL Team 6 were there, the Delta were there, all these awesome organizations were there. And little old me was invited out to kind of give my 5 pence worth as well, and to understand what exactly the question that you've asked, who is it we're looking for? Is it different? And how do we extrapolate that from people that are volunteered, basically? And there's a ton of things, but some of the common themes within all that is this people for willingness to walk towards the problem. That is an unusual thing for people to want to do, more unusual than not. That a terrific car crash, most people will watch. Most people won't walk towards the problem. Some people will, and absolutely some people. And that kind of sheepdog mentality, that kind of almost the servant mentality to other people is one part of that. Other things that we see, the ability to manage stress. It's like stress is going to come at us whether we like it or not. Some people can manage it well. They can, take themselves to high levels, but get themselves back down. To be able to find people that can regulate themselves, that know themselves well enough to know how to do that. We don't have the time, these organizations, to teach people all of these skills over time. So we've got a brief amount of time to select for them. So certainly that resilience is another thing that these people have in abundance, where they are going to get knocked down. They are going to be faced with incredibly impossible challenges that they can just go at, bite off as big a chunk as they can, learn they've not got the skills to do what they need to do, to maybe go seek more other people's advice or learn more about themselves, to prepare themselves better, and then to come back and reattack the problem again. This resilience is one of those things that we just see time and time again. So there's a ton of things that actually these people have, but there's some common themes. I think one of the things that sums it up best for me is that sheepdog mentality, almost viewing yourself in kind of a servant role, but almost a protector, a guardian, almost. That's a common thing, whether you're in NASA. And what drives people to go to space? I mean, really, we know there's not a lot out there, but it's this belief that, well, actually, one day we may need to get this human race off to a different planet, because we could all be hit by an asteroid, I guess. I know this is some astronauts' motivating factors, and that's a servant mentality. You're not doing it for us; you're doing it for the greater good of the human race. And again, that intrinsic motivation to do things for a greater good is another kind of common theme.
A lot of it's almost surprisingly simple, isn't it? In that you just need the person who possesses those traits for them to be developed, because ultimately you don't go into the organization as the refined finished product. You just need to hit the minimum entry point, and then that malleability is the journey. And I know you're a huge fan of talking about that concept, the journey, the process, but social media is rife with talking about getting yourself comfortable being uncomfortable. And it's something that you and I have discussed. It's something that I know we both discuss publicly ourselves. But I think what the past 12 months or so has taught us is that there's almost a second layer to that, where we need to get comfortable being uncomfortable on someone else's terms. And I think that's what you've described there, where a problem presents itself that you haven't manufactured, that you then need to have the willingness to walk towards and tackle head on. Whereas there's lots of things that we can do in our day-to-day lives that build up that resilience you've touched on, because it's definitely something that can go dormant or reduce over time. But I think there's lots of merits in trying to embrace the situations that get thrown at us that we can't control, and that we didn't necessarily prepare for, or didn't necessarily volunteer for. And I think that to bring it back to a general application, what do you think the biggest mistakes that are made in this day and age by whether it's in leadership, whether it's as individuals, that prevent people from finding the best version of their own performance within their day-to-day lives? Because I know you've worked with organizations that have a lot of individuals that lead, a lot of individuals need to perform, and are there any themes that run throughout that where people are presenting themselves as the biggest obstacle?
Yeah. So you mentioned comfortable being uncomfortable, and it's such a commonly thrown around statement now, and it's something that people strive to get, and they go and search for that uncomfortableness, rightly so. We need, our lives are pretty simple, and most people's lives are pretty simple and easy nowadays, way too easy. And to get yourself uncomfortable, for a lot of people, is having to make a meal now versus kind of just sticking something in the microwave, right? And so there's lots of ways that we can seek uncomfortable, and we need to push it. We need to really get uncomfortable. And what the issue is, that people, they go looking for this, but then when things become uncomfortable, they don't recognize that this is what they were seeking, and then they hate it. They hate being uncomfortable, and they quickly try and extract themselves from that problem. Whereas the beauty and being self-aware is knowing that that's what you went for. You're in the moment, you're present, and you're going, well, actually, this difficult period, that horrible feeling in my stomach that this isn't going to end, that I've messed up, that this is not going to go well, that's the point. I've got to keep walking forwards. And that's where people need to recognize that feeling that you're looking for. That uncomfortableness that you're looking for is that feeling. And so when you're in it, just to keep pushing through that is where we should be trying to get to, really. But what is it that kind of the modern person, again, I'm 42, so I kind of feel, again, many ways quite blessed that I've seen this transition, and still, I would say, young enough to understand the ins and outs of social media and the benefits, etc., of it, and the pitfalls. And again, I've got enough grey hairs to have some wisdom and thought on this too. And I think the biggest problem there, with modern society, I'm guilty of it too, by the way, I'm not saying I'm not, is this, the ease with which we can compare ourselves to others. And what we've got now, at a time never in our human history, in the millennium, for as long as humans have been on this earth, we've never had it like we have now, where we can get, at any moment that we choose, we can get a lens into people's lives at the very top of their game. So they might be the funniest, they might be the most creative, they might be the fittest, the strongest, they might be the most beautiful. All these incredibly, I don't like the word talented, but these incredibly high achieving people at the very top of their game, we can choose when we want to go and look and pry into their lives. And they market themselves very well, and very rightly so. They're learning things and doing things that we should all try and understand, if we want similar. But the problem and the consequence of that is we've not seen their journey. We never get to see their journey. And again, it reminds me, I gave a talk to, like I mentioned earlier, to the England football coaches, who are doing great things at the minute. And I was invited down to talk about this word resilience. They were doing a whole day, the England football coaches were doing a whole day on what the word resilience meant. So let's not make out that it's a real easy thing to understand. And I told this story of being stood on the tail ramp of an aircraft about to parachute, maybe into a hostage rescue situation at night with a team of people behind me, and the feeling that you can have in that moment, and the way your mind can go off and catastrophize about the worst things that could happen. And you have to get it back to yourself, and you have to be present. You have to, there's all these coping strategies. And we spoke about all these things. And afterwards, one of the coaches came up to me, a famous coach, came up to me and says, Gaz, I know you said that it's the same as taking a penalty in a World Cup final, that performance under pressure. He said, but it's not really, is it? Because the risk that you're taking could result in this. You've got the teams, and, you're thousands of miles away from any sort of help, and all these things that he was listing off. But because I'd opened up my world to him, where he was hearing these stories of me at the very top of my game, probably the finite point that I'd had in my career, where I wasn't opening the door to the thousands of days of practice up to that very point, where I was the person comfortable to look around my team and go, no, if not me, then who? So no, I am the right person, and have the confidence, the authenticity, going right the way back to my leadership point, to be the authentic leader, to be at the front and go, I'm the person to be stood here, and go and do this. And we often don't look at the steps now that people take towards getting to where they're at. We just dive straight in it. Like Kevin Hart, one of the funniest men on the planet. On a daily basis, you can see what he's up to, and he make you think he's so successful. And you could, as an up and coming comedian, which I'm not, you could feel really bad about yourself checking what he's doing every single day. I'm never going to make it to that, and that's the problem now. We've just got this periscope, or microscope even, into people's lives, and at the very top of their game, and we get no context to their struggle. We get no context to the years that they spent uncomfortable, uncomfortable. And we just don't see that anymore. And we need to remind ourselves of that. And we need to listen to these people, and we need to listen to these people's tell the true story of the narrative of just how hard they've worked to get there, because that's the common theme. This self-discipline to keep working hard at what it is that you're doing is this golden nugget of information that people often kind of oversee or overlook. And I think that's one of the biggest issues.
What moment of your military career rewired your current mindset the most?
Oh, that's an interesting. That is a very good question. I will tell you one that stands out as an epiphany moment, which I've shared before and I think has got a tangible takeaway from it. And that is, brief background, I was Royal Marines, and then I went on selection for Special Forces. So selection process, 6 months. It's the same SBS, SAS. It's the same selection process. Everyone knows about the kind of, walking around Wales with a heavy weight on your back. And there's lessons within that we can dig into afterwards. But after that phase, you have 2 weeks where you essentially do some work on the ranges to get familiar with the weapons you're going to be using, the rifles, and then you deploy to the jungle. On that 2-week phase in between, on one of those range exercises, what you're predominantly doing is what we call break contact drills. So scenario is you're a small patrol, and as you're patrolling, enemy contacts you, ambushes you, and you have to extract out of that position using kind of cover and maneuver. Good example, watch the film Heat. It's probably got one of the best scenes in that for it. So during that, I was firing my weapon rifle down range, and I turned my head to shout to a guy across from me to tell him to move. And as I turned my head, I squeezed off a round. So although my weapon was pointing down range and technically it's safe, that's still a safety violation because my eye was not through the rifle sight. And you can get 2 of those violations on selection, and then you're off. So that was basically my one life gone. And you kind of go and you to the head instructor, and he just gives you you've had this warning, so you're officially notified. And as I was leaving his office and I was walking back over to the accommodation, I was kind of going over this in my head. And I realised in that moment that I'd been putting so much pressure on myself to be perfect and sort of concentrating on the end result of passing or failing, that I was actually performing worse. That mistake that I'd made, I'd never made that in my entire career beforehand. But it was almost this pressure. I'd taken myself past optimum performance to it having a detrimental effect. And I realised that I just needed to let go of that, because I had no control. Obsessing over the end result was not helping me. And actually all I needed to do was concentrate on each day or each moment and just be the best I could, put all my effort into that, and the result would take care of itself. At the end of it, I was either going to be good enough or not. And I just let go of that pressure. And it was almost like a physical weight lifting. And from that point onwards, the experience was a much more positive one. It was more, I say enjoyable loosely, like it's obviously not a very enjoyable experience selection, but also it made it much more likely to get the result that I wanted, which was to pass. And that was the result I ended up with. So that releasing of that pressure to be perfect made a huge difference. And it's something that I see a lot with the coaching that we do. We see one of the most common sort of behavior cycles that we see, what we call boom and bust. And that is someone decides they want to make a change, so a pain point gets acute enough that they want to change something, health and fitness is the classic one, losing weight or getting fitter. And so they decide, right, that's it. I'm going to get this perfect training plan or this perfect diet. And in 8 weeks, I'm going to weigh this much, or I'm going to be able to run this fast, whatever it is. And they follow that plan perfectly for a week, maybe 2 weeks. And then they get a last minute deadline from work, or their kid gets sick or whatever it is. And they miss a meal or they miss a training session. And so the next time that they're due to take an action, that thought process creeps in of, you've already spoiled the perfect run, so that means you're not going to get that perfect result, so what's the point? And so you then miss the next one and the next one, and you basically just throw it all out the window. You fall into an all or nothing mindset, you bin the whole thing, and you're back at square one. And people just live in these boom-bust cycles of trying to make these big perfect changes, and they're rebounding back to where they are. As opposed to the ethos that we embed with everyone we work with is something we call moving average. And the moving average is the idea that you do not need perfection to make progress. All you need is consistency. Like, everyone has bad days. Everyone misses workouts and training sessions. But if you switch from that all or nothing mindset to, okay, I can't do an hour workout, but I can do a 15-minute walk. Well, that still ties into my moving average. And all you need is your moving average to just be in the positive, just always edging into the positive. And if you do that and get rid of this timeline obsession as well, and see it as a lifestyle change and becoming that type of person, as opposed to just getting an end result, it's game changing. When people make that shift, the results they get are so much easier to achieve. And ironically, they get them far quicker as well.
Real challenge from it psychologically, and where you sort of separate, for want of a better phrase, the men from the boys, is waking up each morning thinking, I've got to do this again. I've got to do this again. Oh, do I want to do this again? My hips are hurting. What was your experience like with that?
It's like in business, if you have a good week making money, how many weeks can you do that for in a row and keep doing this, having the same performance? Because you all know, like in business, so people that are watching this that are in the business world, they'll be tuned into the fact that it's the basic things done repeatedly well that really make the difference, not something new and shiny every single day to try. It's consistent basics. That takes patience, that takes grit, it takes determination. And with selection, it was the simple fact of waking up in the morning, knowing what's to come, or worse, knowing you've got to do the shit that made you really painful yesterday. You're going to have to do that again, and then some today, and then tomorrow you're going to have to do it again.
And it's stacking day on day on day on day, isn't it?
And it's only getting hit. The weight's only getting heavier. The distances are only getting longer. The terrain's potentially getting worse. And that takes a lot of start and stop mentality of bookending that day and going, right, that's done, it's in the past. Fuck that off. And then worry about the day that you're on, one day at a time. So one of the things is to not overwhelm yourself and think about 2 weeks down the line. Be on week one and think of an endurance march, which is 65Ks, and going, oh my God, we only did like 14Ks today as a group. And I'm kind of, I'm tired. So 65Ks in 3 weeks from now, or 4 weeks from now, how am I going to do? I'm going to be by myself. It's a long distance. It's heavier weight. The fact of the matter is, all you need to do is chunk everything down, a bit like goal setting. So don't think about the big picture all the time and then overwhelm yourself. Just go, today I've got to get up and I've got to make sure I'm prepped to do this. And at the end of that day, I'm going to be done. I'm going to be sleeping. I'm going to be eating. I'm going to be bookending that day. And the next day, just think about that day. And then when you're out in the hills, it's one step at a time. It's a bit like, you probably heard people saying, I think David Goggins has even said this type of thing where they go, I only have to get from this point to that point, then I'll think about the next point when I get there. And it's true. It's a bit like being on a treadmill. You just go, right, however you can psychologically deal with it the best, whatever fits your personality the most. You've probably done a million versions of this almost, right? So you can either go, I'm thinking about it a minute at a time, or every 2 minutes. You can break it down however you want. And that's what I would say is the difference, is that just keep getting up, keep showing up every single day, when it's dark, when it's cold, when you're tired, when your feet have got blisters, and going again.
So lads dropping around you like flies, directing staff giving you more and more to take on, fatigue's increasing, pain's increasing, questions about yourself are increasing. How did you deal with those lads dropping around you? What did that do for you psychologically? Did it put a fire up your arse, or did it weigh you down?
Yeah, it's the best thing ever. Yeah, I don't really understand, and this isn't, wanting people to fail, but at the end of the day, you know it's a competitive. They have to lose numbers. They can't just take on every single person that attends SAS selection. They can't take on 50% of that. There is essentially a capacity of badged troops at the end. So if they have 250 people going the hills, and miraculously all those people are just getting through it, they don't have the capacity to take 250 people to the jungle, logistically or otherwise. So they have to lose people, right? And as history would prove, that it's always happened. That's just been the pattern. But when people start to drop around you, it's, when you're part of a large group of 250 people day one going, oh my God, am I out of my depth? Psyching yourself out and getting in your own head, and then all of a sudden you're still there when there's 100 people there. That tells yourself that, well, if I'm in the 100 that's still here and there's 150 people not here, something I've been doing is more than what they did. So the narrower that channel is in, and the less the numbers become, you gain energy from that, because you're still in the mix, you're still in the fight, and that can only ever be a good thing. So psychologically, it's actually a really good thing for the mind, and I alluded to that on the Human 24 podcast as well when I was on it, about the one day that I really remember when I was having the shittest day ever, and someone who I perceivably thought was way more advanced and more experienced and bigger and stronger than I was, just basically wrapped his tits in front of me, right in front of me, and I was like, and suddenly I was just like, it was like a rocket up your ass, because that wasn't in my mind. I wasn't contemplating that. So I'm going, well, I must be mentally stronger than he is, because he's just done something that I've not even contemplated.
For clarity,
so
wrapping his tits meaning pulling out voluntary withdrawal.
Yeah, actually, and voluntary withdrawal is like something that is completely an individual thing. People have got the reasons, and I think when people do that, again, it's not, you put a bigger consequence in the fact that, would he have done it if someone held a gun to his kid's head? Then likely not. But you either want it or you don't want it, and the more it means to you, then the more reason you have to keep going.
2 weeks before you were due to finish, you had a career-ending injury in your knee. Am I right, on one of the jumps that you had?
Yeah, so this was when I was when I passed the special forces and I was in. So I passed selection, and for me, I joined at the busiest time in UK SF history. And it was the height of the war on terror. We're in Afghanistan, we're in Iraq, we were rescuing hostages off the east coast of Africa. I was literally doing everything that you signed up to do in such a short period of time as well. It wasn't like spread out over 10, 15 years. It was within a very condensed period of time. And so for me, it's like these children play Call of Duty. That was our lifestyle, day in, day out, and enjoyed every day I went into work. And you're at your pinnacle of your career. I never looked. For me, I was a lifer. I was in the military till as long as I could do my job. And we were about to go on another tour to Afghanistan. I was doing pre-deployment training out in Oman, and we're doing what's a hey-ho jump, high altitude, high opening jump. So you exit the aircraft at 15,000 feet. The parachute opens straight away, and you travel towards the target area. And that can be anything up to 30 minutes in the air or 40 kilometers to the area. I'd done this jump, I've done hundreds of these jumps, and this was like the third jump of the day. But this time when I exited, there was something that wasn't right. And straight away I looked up and my leg was caught in the line above my head. The problem I had is if I couldn't clear my leg in time, the parachute was going to open and potentially pull my leg off. I couldn't clear it in time. The parachute went taut, pulled my leg up over my head to the right, but thankfully my ankle cleared from the line and my leg did free. But straight away with the pain, I knew there was a problem. I was vomiting because the pain was so severe. And at 15,000 feet, you're on the limits of oxygen. So I was also drifting in and out of consciousness. No one in the team was aware there was a problem. And you can't really come over the radio and say, oh, I've got a sore leg, because there's nothing anyone can do about it. So you just need to, you need to land it. So my first concern was, how was I going to land it? If I didn't land it correctly, I could actually damage my good leg as well. But I landed it one-legged. It was a great landing, but the damage sustained, as you've rightly touched on there, ended my career. I tore my ACL, my MCL, my lateral meniscus within my knee, my hamstring, my calf, and my quadricep as well. So all the supporting muscles as well.
The full house, isn't it, really, when you think of it like that?
Yeah, that was it. And for me, it wasn't so much the injury, it was the fact that my friends were going off to Afghanistan. They were going on one plane, and then I was going on another plane. And there's a lot of synergies with professional sports athletes and special forces. You spent your career building yourself up to be the best you can be within that arena, competing at the highest level, and you get an injury and your friends go off to the Ashes, or your friends go off on the Lions tour. However, you're going that way to get physio, and there's a lot of synergies in that. But for me, that was the hardest thing, is that I couldn't go and support my friends in Afghanistan again.
Well, that's why I asked about the injury, because it's interesting with that perspective how you then look back on the career, which was so condensed and so basically what you signed up to do, and what I can imagine some different generations of UKSF might have wished they could have had the real intensity that you did. So looking back on your career, when you were faced with that injury, was it one that you felt had you fully scratched the itch, or had it been something that was more on the table for you?
I had fully scratched the itch. I got to where I wanted to be. A lot of my friends do say, be careful what you wish for. When we're like, oh, you want to go back out to Afghan on tour? It's like, there was a friend of mine actually who was on that tour, and he wanted to get out of the military. He said, I'm going to do one more tour. That was the end of his career. He got killed in Afghanistan. So it's almost like, yes, I'd scratched the itch, but you are playing a lottery game. That could have been my last tour as well. But for me, it was, be careful what you wish for. Things happen for a reason as well. You can't control the uncontrollables. What happened. There's nothing I can do beyond that. It's just like, now you just got to keep looking forward. It's probably not the direction you were looking originally, but still keep looking forward. There's other options to you. But I think the more frustrating thing for me was the fact that I thought I could get fit and get back out there and assist the lads. But there was a big spiral of medical issues within the military. They lost my medical documents, and it took me 44 weeks to get operated on, which should normally, only take a matter of weeks. And so because of that was where my sort of mentally I was suffering, but physically as well. My injured leg now was like a couple of kilos lighter than my good leg. So, and I think that was, for me personally, that was what was hard to grasp, is the fact that you've gone from being the best of the best, and then all of a sudden you're on a pile of paper, and the fact that they couldn't even get me operated on within 44 weeks was annoying for me.
And then you become a civilian, which is a difficult transition at the best of times, but it's one that in a operational capacity, you live and breathe admin, prep, but you didn't necessarily have the mental prep that you would have had did you know you were about to become a civilian in that capacity. So that must have been a real challenge.
Yeah, I think, again, that there's that transition, that sort of synergy with professional sports people, and not just professional sports people, anyone who works in a team. You've gone from working in a tight-knit unit, having a role, having a purpose, to like, where do I now fit in society? I didn't know where I fitted or what I was going to do. I also, as you touched on, normally if you're leaving the military, you sort of make that, you have a lead-up time to it. I didn't have that period, that time to prep. It was sort of like, no, you're now out the door. So, and without sounding like Liam Neeson, people with our skill sets, natural progression is the private security industry. And But the great thing about the military, they are like your mother or your father. They clothe you, they feed you, they pay you on time. You know, I didn't know what council tax ban we were paying or what heating. Now they take those distractions away from you so you can concentrate on your job. Thankfully for me, my wife sort of replaced the military. She's very good at that. She's an entrepreneur. She deals with all that sort of admin stuff in the background that I'd never had to deal with before because the military sort of picked that up for me. And she set up our first security company on a BlackBerry watching EastEnders. You know, for me, it's like whether I tick the right boxes within company's house. So you hear stories of people transitioning either quite smooth or turbulent. And thankfully for me, mine was quite smooth because my wife sort of picked up where the military dropped me off. You know, she took all that responsibility so I can just concentrate on work. But to add to the pressure, my wife was 10 months pregnant when I left the military as well. I didn't know if there was going to be any work there. How was I going to support the family? So mentally, there was a lot of things going on up here as well. Still trying to deal with the injury. The fact that I couldn't even run 100 meters now either without my knee blowing up.
It's tough, isn't it? It's tough when it sounds like so much happened all at once and with a kid on the way. Was it child number one as well?
Child number one, yeah, that's it, yeah.
So quite the synergy of oh shit going on, I can imagine at that point. But you immediately settled into as a lot you do is private security. Was there anything else you considered, or was it the only direction you want to go in because it was still operational?
It was still operational for me, you know, still itched that scratch. I again, because I didn't really have time to think. It was like, well, what is the easiest way or quickest way to get money in and support my family? You know, then we can sort of look further down the line. A lot of the guys were doing security in Afghanistan and Iraq. I didn't want to go Afghan and Iraq. I spoke to a friend of mine and he said, actually, the best money is in corporate protection, whether it's close protection or consulting and things like that. So, you know, and that's what you find about the security industry. It's not risk-reward ratio balanced, you know. So the guys that are in Afghan and Iraq, they'd be on the 50% of what I'd be on at the London Olympics or Brazil World Cup or taking the UAE Royal Family Super Yacht, you know. So I was that, less risk, more reward. So I sort of switched towards that direction. But my first task was within 48 hours of leaving the military. It was the Arab Spring in the Middle East, especially North Africa. And I was in Libya helping set up the DFID project, which is part of the British Embassy in Benghazi. But a lot of the guys I used to work with had their own sort of maritime security companies and were doing very well off the east coast of Africa, and because Somalia piracy was at its peak. But I didn't want to sort of be competing with these guys. You know, I wanted to find my own niche within the industry. So when I was out in Libya, I soon identified the Libyans didn't want Libya being another Afghan and Iraq when Gaddafi had fallen. But also these big private security companies, I call them the Big Five, were charging seven-figure sums for crisis management and evacuation plans. But actually, when you scrape the surface, there was nothing in place. So I came home, my wife gave birth to Molly, and I said, I think I have an idea regards a niche in the industry. And I sort of explained it to her. So she said, fine. So I went back into Libya, took a lot of our life savings out, and there was a huge proliferation of weapons at the time. So took advantage of that. I bought 30 weapons off the black market, and I buried them between Tunis and Egypt, along with comms kit and money, and just designed my own evacuation plans. We lived in Aberdeen when I left Paul. My wife's from Aberdeen. So Aberdeen's the oil and gas capital of Europe. So there's a lot of oil and gas companies there who are in Libya as well. And I just sold this concept to them and just sat on it. So that was where I was sort of started my niche. I had the luxury, my wife wasn't too concerned about regular income. So I was doing ad hoc work. So every time I get a phone call, it was a different job. It was a different country. So in a short period of time, actually, from leaving the military, I was going to countries that I'd never been to before. I was understanding more about the security industry, and each task was unique and different. You know, I'll give you an example. Like one phone call would be, can I train the Kurdish Special Forces in Erbil to fight ISIS? So spent 6 weeks there. Next phone call, can you take the UAE Royal Family Super Yacht from Barcelona and Maldives? Next one, big court case in Cape Town. So I was literally learning more about the industry in a short period of time. In 2012, when the American ambassador got killed in Benghazi, I just finished the London Olympics and I was in Benghazi that evening, and I got a phone call if I could evacuate 8 German engineers from Benghazi to Tripoli, which I did through safe houses I had in the desert. And because of the success of that, 2 years later, I was at Brazil covering the World Cup. And there was now the Tripoli War. It's a civil war between the militias and the government. And I got a phone call from the Canadian embassy saying, look, your name keeps coming up. We need assistance. So I flew back in, helped them, and single-handedly evacuated the Canadian embassy, 18 military and 4 diplomats from Tripoli to Tunis. Sounds very sexy in Hollywood and things like that, but I've never had to dig up any weapons or anything like that. I was understanding the demographics, the politics, and the tribal influences. So that's where I that's my niche within the industry. I could go to any country, Yemen, Somalia, Libya, on my own, and just get embedded with the locals